Hi everyone. Um, so, in this COVID world, there was one major difference in both our lives. Suddenly, since the last 3 weeks, Rahul and me, who've never worked together and, as you know, run separate practices, we're here together in the same house, not killing each other, but watching each other, watching our interactions with our respective offices. And it's been very interesting to see the way each of us works. And we thought we'd share some of this with you guys. We met a long time ago. I think we've been married 30 years. We met more than 27 years. We met many years before we were married. So, yeah, maybe Rahul will tell you a little bit about that story. He has his version. I think I have mine.
Well, she was intriguing from the beginning, fascinating and intriguing from the beginning, from the first week. We lived in the neighborhood and we became, fortunately, good friends. She was always someone I could talk to, bounce ideas off, and we became very, very good friends outside of college, and then we're really together only after the fourth year. It was quite a process. I had to woo her a lot. So then I followed her to the US. She went to study at the University of Michigan. I followed her there, and we both got our masters and came back. But before that, we actually tried to work together. This is probably where it's going to differ. But we were doing my mother had asked me to do a women's development center in Mahad for her. And I had decided that 4 friends, very, very close friends, would work on this project together. So there was Shimul, Mihir, Farooq and me. We set off to go to Mahad to see the site. And in those days, I think all of us believed that you need to be on site to design. So we decided to spend 4 to 5 days at the site and design on site. And as it turned out, we would wake up at 5 in the morning. Shimul and I were heavily into pranayam at that time. We'd do our pranayam and then head off to site, very peaceful minds, and then spend the rest of the day arguing on site. And very little work got done. Shimul and me would be arguing. Farooq and me would be standing around saying, you two need to decide. And that's when the thought entered my head that I don't think I can work with her.
I don't think the thought had ever entered our head to even marry them.
Yeah, but it just entered that I can't work with her.
Okay.
And then, of course, we went to the US and came back, and you started your own firm.
That's
and
right.
I had no intention at that time, before that, of joining my father, but I did. That was quite a journey. That's how we met each other through college and decided, according to me, why we're not going to work together. And I think that's been a very wise decision. I can't imagine her being boss everywhere. There's some place in life I need to be the boss, and I get to play that in the office.
Yeah, no, I mean, very similar, except that I don't think I was too worried about arguing my life with him. I think I was more worried about being subsumed in a family-run architectural practice. I think I was too eager to do my own thing. And I think from both our perspective, it's really been the best decision we could ever have taken. We run very, very different practices. I think it would be fun to get a little bit of Rahul's journey. I actually find it quite amazing that somebody can step into a practice that's so established. I am Kadri Architects was a very established practice. His father, according to me, was a fairly daunting figure at the time. And it's been interesting to watch Rahul's journey of how he's kind of steered his practice. His father did a lot of five-star hotels, did very kind of image-driven projects, Nehru Center, which you may have seen, and lots of other projects that were very image-driven. Rahul is a very different personality, and he's very kind of, he's interested in how to serve humanity. He's very interested in making a difference in the world, and he's very democratic in the way he works. So I'd love for Rahul to tell us a little bit about how he steered this huge ship from the practice his father built to the one he's built, which has very interesting, they work currently with a lot of university projects, township projects, and we'll talk later about some of the projects that he does on self-development, housing, etc. But yeah, tell us.
Yeah, so joining my father in 1990, he was definitely very dominating, very used to doing things his way, didn't want another voice. So for 12 years, that's really what I did. I served him and his vision of what he wanted. Of course, learned a lot in the way. Learned a lot about architecture, a lot about the basics. We built quite a lot together. But we found that nearer to the 90s that most of his clients had actually moved on. They weren't there in the corporate world, and the quality of projects we were beginning to get was beginning to suffer. And being who he was and with the name he had established, he wouldn't allow us to participate in any competitions. And so he would be on the jury for a lot of them and then come back and say, how poor the projects were, but they had to choose one. So there were IIMs being built, there were IITs being built, and we were not a part of the process. So seeing that, and I felt I had to do something, and behind his back, we entered a couple of competitions. And luckily the computers were in and rampant then, so he had no idea what we were doing on the computers. And so we entered the competitions. One was for Club Mahindra, which was the project in Karur, which we fortunately won. And another one was for Symbiosis, which also we won. So having won those, we went back to him and said, this is what we've done. We won these, so these are going to be the projects we have. And it was really through a series of competitions that I got a chance to reinvent the firm and stir it in another direction. And those early competitions which we won really have become our steady clients now. So we have a set of 5 clients who we serve. Looking at a few more in a different sector now, but it's really those early competitions, and because there were competitions I had won without him, he was really very, very good by saying, okay, these are yours, you run them the way you want, I will not have any say in it at all. So that's how, by about 95, he began to kind of phase off, but by then he was 75 years old, so it was time that he began to slow down. Yeah, so that was a journey. It was difficult. It took a long time. 12 years was an internship with him. So Shimul, there have been a number of projects of yours which have been, you'd say, watershed projects for you, which have probably defined your practice. Which are those? And can you tell us something about those?
I think it's varied across time. Every few years we have a couple of watershed projects, and there's a lot of work that goes on, but one or two really push us to innovate, define new boundaries. And I think way back Ayush Shakti and Synergy Kalachoki, which was in a burnt down shed, were the two watershed projects. A few years later, I think the first 10 years of my practice was really doing more interiors than architecture, which is typical. But for me, the way the practice has grown has been the same client that I did maybe a small office or in those days, many, many years ago, I still did some residential interiors. Whatever I did for somebody, they grew, they asked me to build a house for them, they asked me to build an office for them, an office building, sometimes a factory. So my first kind of 15 years of practice was really getting this range of projects to be able to build, and across the country, because people would move or people had factories in other parts of the country. And I think it took a good 15 or 18 years to really establish ourselves to the point that then we started getting a lot of new clients based on projects that we'd already done. So every decade has had its watershed projects, but I'd say eventually every few years, in Nirvana, the Nirvana office building, which won the World Architecture Festival Award, was a watershed because it just helped us detail every nook and cranny, so that even today I find that's a project that I go back to and I feel, wow, it works. And I think when you get to that stage in your practice, and that has really not been just me, it's very much been the infusion of great talent in the office. The three project directors were part of the office, I think, by the time it was around 2005, 15 years into my practice. And they have really helped us establish, innovate, and now, tackle new frontiers. Do you have watershed projects?
No, we're just coming back.
Okay.
Nirvana, I think, was a great turning point for you from what I see. Before that, you were always concerned with the quality of light and ventilation, etc. But there was certain distilling that happened in Nirvana, and you eliminated a lot. Your earlier projects like Ayush Shakti, many of the earlier projects had a lot of Indian symbology. There was an ethnicity which was there in image, which you then translated to craft, working with people, working and collaborating. So it was craftsman-like, but you were really distilling and getting to the essence of what's needed. So I saw that quite a shift. So Nirvana was a shift. Maybe you're coming back a little bit to imagery with the hotels you're doing now, based on the place and religion that they represent, the place. But there's been a phase, I think, where we were all, Jeffrey Bawa was someone we really looked up to, and so, but even he in his practice changed a lot. So I think Nirvana was that shift for you. It was a major shift that I saw. There was a clarity.
I have such a big belief in transitions. Nirvana was a very visible project, and because it won so many awards, everyone knows it. But I think any shift takes many shifts before that. And I think in a lot of the projects we were doing before that, we were doing a lot of retail branding, from Fab India to Aura Diamonds. There was that little bit of a shift happening. And I think what worked with Nirvana was we had a very, very trusting client. Our client was also a very creative ad film production company. And they were literally like, do what you need to. And everything we showed them was kind of okay with them. And then even when it came to infusing the interiors with their own, their own personality, they did it so beautifully in synergy with the building. And I feel that trust takes you to another level.
We'll come back to relationships with your clients. We'll come back to that a little later. But that's a fascinating thing which I find in your practice. So you were asking me about watershed projects for me. I was always interested in architecture theory and design process, and Christopher Alexander and his work has kind of
deeply influenced you.
Deeply influenced me. His pattern language, his timeless way of building. And the first time I really got to use it is when we were working in Berkeley for an architecture office where a set of employees in the office decided to enter a competition outside the office. And I found that because of the pattern language and the way it spoke, I was able to lead the design process in that office. I mean, there were students, there were other people from MIT and Cornell and Harvard, but me from Academy of Architecture, Mumbai, was able to lead the project. And that really told me that this was important, that I had a way of thinking which was important. So that the project never happened, we came in second, all of that, but it gave me a certain confidence that the direction I was going at was correct.
And now?
Well, it continues, that journey continues. I think we've deepened it a lot.
So what would you say is the nirvana for you? With a pun on nirvana.
Well, the competitions we entered, right? So Club Mahindra, Karur to some extent, but more than that, Symbiosis and the Hilltop campus we did for Symbiosis. Karur was really a combination of what Dad would do and what I would do, kind of the holistic environmental nature of my work and the symbology and the imagery of his work. But in Symbiosis, the initial 1993 project, 2003 project, was when I consciously kind of decided to break away and create an imagery. And the other person really influenced me was Charles Moore and his whole notion of creating places which are memorable and infusing place with memory, history and memory. So I think Charles Moore, Christopher Alexander, and I think I merged the principles of both these people kind of with my own sense of what a site is like in the Symbiosis project. So I think those were two turning points as far as I was concerned. And a crisis is always good. So whenever there's been a crisis in the office, I turn to various sources of inspiration and come up with things that help. So I also wonder what the COVID crisis is going to do for all of us and how we're going to evolve how we practice, how we live, how neighborhoods live, neighborhoods are created, how buildings are created.
I'm sure we'll get to that. I'm sure there's going to be questions on that. We're going to, open it up in a few minutes. One of the things that I think you were going to...
Yeah, so your office has a level of conversation which is great. You all talk about so many things in your office, and whoever comes in soon becomes a feminist. And there's a reason for that.
Including the men.
Including the men. Well, there's a particular practice you have in your lunch break, which is a fascinating thing. So tell us more about that. What happens in your lunch break?
So before I get to the lunch break, it's really, I think we have a very holistic attitude towards design, that your theories, your thoughts, your attitudes is what actually leads to design. So at lunch every day, the 25 of us meet for lunch, and the office serves lunch, and we have every day one person shows a video. on anything at all. It could be, architecture, it could be politics, it could be economics, it could be anything. And then we all tend to discuss it. And I think a lot of people find meaning and voice during those lunch videos. A lot of people in their exit interviews or whatever have talked about the lunch videos as being seminal to their growth at SJK Architects. And on the whole, I would say it's a fairly democratic office, 3 teams, lots of discussion. It's a very kind of touchy-feely, discussion-oriented office. And sitting at home these days, I've been noticing how differently Rahul and I work. Rahul clearly he's a very systems guy. I'm a very relationship and person. And they have, he's been honing this system in his office called, I think, Scrum. And I think he should talk a little more about how that process works and how it leads to a lot of autonomy among people within his office. It's a very different kind of democracy, but it's there.
Well, fortunately, I have people working for me who are a lot smarter than I am. And at some point it struck that, using the intelligence of the entire office is going to be much better than just relying on my little brains. So we got we came across a system called Scrum where we have a very intense focus on the customer and what the customer wants instead of what we want as architects. So we combine this intense customer focus and this intense questioning about what will really make a difference in their life, in their daily life, in their relationships. How is this residential building going to make a family more of a family? This resort, how are they going to bond with each other? What are they really going to do? What are the questions they'll ask? What are the activities they'll do? So this client focus and this we have a system that allows everyone to contribute. The leaders, our team leaders, only define what needs to be done and don't say how it's to be achieved. So we have stories. So as a student, I want a classroom which is filled with daylight so I can pay more attention. Or in a school, I want the layout to be such that there's very little bullying. And those are stories, so we want to make those stories come true. And it's then for the team to work out how to make it happen. We don't tell people how to do things, we only tell them what needs to happen. So my focus is really then to work with the leaders to make sure that the stories are really meaningful. And once that's done, my work is more or less done. So it gives me a lot of free time to do other things and to lead the office in direction that I think it needs to be led in the future. And this was not the case. Like most other architects, I was doing everything. 5 years ago, I was doing everything: designing, sketching, leading every project, involved with every detail, involved with the administration, involved with marketing, clients. So basically going crazy till we found Scrum, which has really, I think, liberated everybody, and everybody in the office now has a much more holistic role to play. And even students who come in get responsibility and get to really contribute in meaningful ways that they didn't get to earlier. So that's a little bit about Scrum. It's about doing twice the work in half the time, and it's really worked for us. And in fact, the lockdown has not kind of slowed us too much because the system allows us to work remotely. We had the systems in place. We use our Trello boards, etc., etc. So, Shimul, coming to another question, is it my turn or your turn?
Go ahead.
You've always, right from Pravina Mehta days, spoken about relationships, about how architecture is about relationships, relationships of materials, relationships of colors, relationships of textures, how one space relates to another, but more importantly, relationships with your clients. Now, clients, as we all know, can sometimes be very difficult, but your office has the tenacity and maintains a certain positiveness. And so tell me more about this, and how is it that all your clients have really gone on to become very close friends of yours?
I mean, I always honestly tell everybody that choosing an architect is like choosing a life partner. And therefore, do it carefully. And then, you know, that mutual respect is extremely important. I think my practice has been based on building relationships. I think that listening that one needs to do with one's clients, that interpreting, and then making sure that one has a vision that incorporates the client's ideas and thoughts, and then communicating that vision effectively. I think we pay a lot of attention to our role as somebody who interprets the needs of the client, creates a vision that far supersedes what they may have thought about. And then communicating that very, very carefully to the client. That's been very important for us. And I think that back and forth has led to some absolutely wonderful relationships. I mean, you're absolutely right. Every client has gone on to become a wonderful friend. And that close process, I think, is what tends to drive it. Yeah. But to come back to you, one of the things that I deeply admire about Rahul and his practice is that, you know, we always talk about architects as being people who can really contribute to the built environment, to their neighborhoods, their cities, and yet so many of us are so steeped in our individual practices that we don't really manage the time to do that. I find Rahul has that amazing tenacity to participate in communities, neighborhood projects, as well as really participate in issues regarding the city. I think it would be great if you can talk about that. The other very interesting thing that he has been doing recently is what I consider self-engineered projects. That is, you see gaps in society, and then you try and make sure that your firm addresses those gaps, rather than kind of sitting back and waiting for clients to approach you. And he does that with, particularly with housing. But yeah, it'd be great to hear a little bit about your involvement in the city. I'm just going to close that window, which is making a lot of sound. Go ahead.
So I think this interest started watching my parents and the leadership role they took in the community. So my father was always the secretary of the society. He was involved with urban planning issues in the city, and my mother was also, very moved by things that she saw and felt she needed to lead and take action. So it was there in the family. I think it's there in most families. So that was always, so when we moved back to Mumbai and we got married, we started staying in Brighton, I didn't hesitate to join the building committee, and because I knew as an architect I could make a difference there. And then from there we formed the Lukta Lane Association. From the Lukta Lane Association, which I knew I could also lead, because a lot of these things are what an architect has skills for. And from there it went to the Nepean Road, the Citizens Forum, so it was the entire road we were dealing with. And one thing leads to another, and you know that that we as architects are trained, and urban planners are trained to look at things in a critical way. So when issues like how should Mumbai develop, how should Maharashtra develop, large chunks of land are being developed, what's the right way to do it. Our voice can make a difference. And even though many of us believe, it's like, maybe it doesn't, I've seen my parents doing what they did, and I know ultimately it matters. So therefore, putting my neck out and taking a stand and doing certain things. I know a lot of my friends don't like my stand on the coastal road. Many people may not like my stand on the eastern waterfront, etc. But these are all things as architects we are trained to speak about. The other problem we have as architects, that I wondered a lot, and that kind of has occupied a lot of my thinking, is how do we create customers? Any business survives only because of the customers. And as architects, we usually wait for the client to come to us. There's nothing we really do. We're not permitted to market. We're not permitted to do anything. So we're really waiting. So I felt that there needs to be another way for us to practice. And housing has always been something I've been interested in. So when Chandrasekhar Prabhu came and spoke
starting
to
with
me,
your thesis, which was on residential architecture in Mumbai.
Yeah, so my thesis in 1985 was about that.
And mine was on slums, and I've done nothing about it. Yeah. So,
As yet. So when Chandrasekhar Prabhu came and spoke to me about a model where building societies can redevelop on their own, and they don't have to depend on a developer. And now the FSI that the government is giving is significant, and it's affordable for them to do it. It just made a lot of sense. And then Knight Frank came and said, "Will you partner with us?" And I was ready. I said, "Yes, of course we will." And we decided in the office to commit a certain set of resources to do this. I said, "Don't worry, we'll just support it for a year. We'll find a way to make the office work, the rest of the office work. Let's just do this. This is something that will make a difference to..." And for the first time we have a chance. Isn't he going to give the question on the one side?
No, he wants us to turn commence on here.
Okay.
Yeah.